For 7 years, my father introduced me at family dinners as his biggest disappointment, the girl who couldn't hack it in basic training and washed out in silence. He wore his 25-year veteran status like armor, using it to belittle my ordinary life while boasting to everyone who would listen that I quit before I ever began. I never corrected him. I kept my mouth shut because I had signed a non-disclosure agreement backed by federal law. But last Friday night, at his retirement gala packed with 200 military veterans, the highest-ranking general in the room stopped his keynote address mid-sentence. He didn't salute my father. Instead, he locked eyes with me in the back row, snapped to attention, and commanded the entire ballroom to stand. What happened next shattered 7 years of lies, and my father's face went completely pale. My name is Evelyn Miller. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 7 years, I have lived as the designated black sheep of the Miller family. To the rest of the world, I was just a quiet data analyst living in a modest apartment in Chicago, driving a sensible sedan and keeping to myself. But to my father, retired Master Sergeant Robert Miller, I was something much worse, living proof of failure. My father spent 25 years in the United States Army. He built his entire identity around rigid discipline, polished brass, and unyielding expectations. In our house, you didn't just meet standards. You dominated them. When I enlisted at 24, he told the entire extended family that his bloodline was finally producing another real soldier. 3 months later, my official military personnel file went dark, and I returned home without explanation. Instead of asking what happened, my father made up his own story. To save his precious ego at Sunday dinners and barbecue cookouts, he told everyone who would listen that his little girl simply couldn't handle the pressure. He claimed I cried during basic training, cracked under the physical demands, and packed my bags before the first real test. He turned my supposed failure into a cautionary tale, using it to inflate his own rugged legacy while making sure I never forgot my place at the bottom of the hierarchy. I never argued with him. When my aunts gave me pitying looks, and my cousins smirked over Thanksgiving dinner, I just nodded and chewed my food. I couldn't tell them the truth, not because I was ashamed, but because speaking a single word about where I had actually been would violate Title 18 of the United States Code. Then came the invitation to my father's grand retirement gala. 200 distinguished veterans, active service members, and local dignitaries gathered in downtown Chicago to toast his military career. He made sure I attended, not out of love, but to seat me at table 24, right in the back corner by the kitchen doors, as a quiet reminder of the standard I had allegedly failed to meet. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel smelled of heavy cologne, polished leather shoes, and expensive banquet prime rib. 200 guests filled the gilded hall, their conversations blending into a low roar beneath crystal chandeliers. Men in immaculate dress blues clinked heavy crystal glasses, their service ribbons catching the overhead lights in brilliant flashes of red, blue, and gold. At the center of it all sat table 1, raised slightly on a low platform. That was where my father held court. He sat beside my stepmother, beaming, his back rigid as an iron rod, shaking hands with city council members and retired colonels who leaned down to offer their congratulations. I was seated near the swinging service doors of the catering staff, watching the spectacle from behind a glass of ice water. About halfway through the cocktail hour, my cousin Tyler strolled over, a Scotch glass balanced in his hand and an arrogant smirk on his face. Tyler had washed his hands of manual labor to work in commercial real estate, but he loved adopting my father's brand of condescension whenever it suited him. "Surprised you showed up, Evie," Tyler said, resting his hand against the back of an empty chair. "Must be a little tough watching Uncle Robert get honored for 25 years of real service while you spent 3 months doing calisthenics and gave up." "I'm happy to support my father, Tyler," I answered calmly, keeping my voice even. "Right. Very noble," he chuckled, swirling his scotch. "Just make sure you don't wander up toward the VIP tables. People might ask to see your uniform, and nobody wants that awkward conversation." I smiled politely, picked up my water glass, and looked toward the stage without another word. He had no idea. None of them did. I hadn't dropped out of basic training. During my 8th week at Fort Jackson, 3 plainclothes officers had pulled me from the barracks at 3 in the morning. My background in advanced mathematics and machine intelligence had flagged an alert deep within the Defense Intelligence Agency. While my father believed I was crying on a bus ride home, I was actually boarding a transport to an underground facility in Fort Meade, Maryland. For 7 years, I hadn't been working a standard 9 to 5. I had been tracking adversarial cyber incursions and protecting high-value assets across 3 theaters of operation. Every mission was sealed under strict national security clearance. At 7:30, the house lights dimmed. A drum roll echoed from the sound system as my father took the stage, clearing his throat into the podium microphone. "Thank you, everyone," Robert said, his deep voice carrying across the entire ballroom. 25 years in uniform teaches a man one fundamental truth. Blood, discipline, and grit are choices. You either have the spine to carry the family torch, or you fade into the background. He paused, his eyes scanning across the room until they found me sitting at the far back corner. The look was fleeting but unmistakable, a silent, calculated jab wrapped in a polished speech. The room erupted in applause, but the show was only just beginning. The applause for my father's opening remarks was still echoing through the ballroom when the double mahogany doors at the back of the hall swung open. 2 active-duty military escorts in flawless dress uniforms stepped through first, clearing the entryway. Behind them walked a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair cut tight against his scalp. 4 polished stars gleamed on his shoulder boards, catching the crystal lights. It was General Harrison Vance, 3-star Deputy Commander of Cyber Command and one of the most respected strategic minds in modern military history. He was also my father's former division commanding officer from over a decade ago. The entire ballroom immediately shifted. Conversations died instantly. Officers in the audience straightened their backs, and the chatter from the VIP tables evaporated into dead silence. My father, still standing at the podium on the main stage, looked as though he had just won the lottery. He practically beamed, smoothing his tie and quickly stepping down from the stage to meet the guest of honor. "General Vance, sir," my father announced loudly, his voice carrying through the quiet room as he marched down the center aisle, his right hand outstretched. "What an incredible honor. I didn't know your schedule would allow you to attend our humble gathering. Please, sir, we have a reserved seat for you right at table 1. General Vance didn't take the hand. He didn't even slow down. His piercing gray eyes scanned the sea of round tables, completely ignoring the extended hand, the flashing cameras, and the expectant smiles of the local dignitaries. He walked straight past my father without a second glance, his long strides cutting through the center aisle toward the back of the room. My father froze in place, his arms still half raised in the air, his face caught between confusion and utter embarrassment. The guests watched in stunned silence as the 4-star general bypassed the VIP platforms, bypassed the city officials, and headed straight toward table 24 by the kitchen doors. I placed my cloth napkin neatly on the table and stood up. General Vance stopped 2 paces in front of me. He snapped his heels together, raised his right hand to his temple in a sharp, flawless salute, and held it there. "Major Miller," General Vance said, his gravelly voice ringing out with enough authority to vibrate the chandeliers. "The Pentagon signed your declassification orders at 1600 hours today. Ma'am, the auditorium is yours. They're waiting for you." A collective gasp rippled through the 200 guests. My cousin Tyler dropped his scotch glass. It shattered against the parquet floor, but nobody even looked at the mess. Every set of eyes was fixed on the back corner of the room. My father turned around slowly, his face completely drained of color. "General Vance," his voice cracked, the booming confidence gone. "Sir, with all due respect, there must be a mistake. That's my daughter, Evelyn. She left the service years ago. She was never an officer." General Vance didn't flinch. He lowered his salute, his posture rigid as iron. "There is no mistake, Master Sergeant," the general replied, his voice slicing through the silence. "The only mistake in this room was assuming you knew the full scope of your daughter's service." The general extended an arm, gesturing toward the stage. I stepped out from behind the small table and walked alongside him up the main aisle. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. The same officers and city officials who had smirked at me an hour earlier were now staring in open-mouthed disbelief. When we reached the stage, General Vance took the microphone from the stand. He reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a heavy manila folder stamped with bold red ink. "Declassified. Directive 8104. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Vance announced, his voice commanding the room. For 7 years, Major Evelyn Miller served as the lead operations officer for Task Force Chimera, our nation's premier cyber defense and intelligence unit. Under direct orders from the Department of Defense, her enlistment, commissions, and field operations were placed under Tier 1 classification. The general turned, looking directly at my father, who stood frozen at the base of the stage stairs. 3 years ago, Vance continued, when the 3rd Infantry Division's communications grid was breached during Operation Desert Shield 2, Master Sergeant Miller's entire former unit was walking into an ambush. It wasn't standard intelligence that saved those 240 men. It was a single analyst who manually rerouted adversarial drone feeds over 48 continuous hours from an underground bunker. General Vance stepped down from the podium and handed the heavy folder directly to my father. "Read page 4, Master Sergeant," the general commanded softly. "Read who authorized the extraction that brought your men home alive." My father's hands trembled violently as he pulled open the folder. His eyes darted across the official seals, the ribbon commendations, and the final signature at the bottom of the Distinguished Service Cross citation, Major Evelyn Miller. He looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes, his mouth trembling. The daughter he had spent 7 years calling a failure had been the invisible shield keeping his brothers in arms alive. General Vance stepped aside, leaving me alone at the center of the stage. For 2 seconds no one moved. Then, a retired colonel in the front row stood up and began to clap. Within moments, all 200 guests were on their feet, the ballroom erupting into a thunderous standing ovation. Relatives who had mocked me were cheering with wide eyes, while my father remained frozen near the aisle, clutching the declassified folder to his chest. I adjusted the microphone and spoke with quiet composure. True service isn't defined by the medals displayed on a jacket, or how loudly a story is told. It is measured in the silent promises kept in the dark, so others can live in the light. "Thank you." After the applause settled, I walked out toward the lobby. My father caught up to me near the elevators, his eyes red and his hands still shaking. "Evie, I didn't know," he whispered, his voice broken. "All these years. I'm so sorry." "I know you didn't, Dad," I said calmly, looking him in the eye. "Because you never asked." I turned, stepped into the open elevator, and left the past behind me for good.